For the last 100 years, we have been deprived of the truth in our educational system. We have been dumbed down. We do not understand our faith. We don't understand God. We don't understand what's going on in the world. J.R.R. Tolkien saw clearly through his education, through his mentors. He saw clearly into the future, to what's going on today. If you want to understand what's going on today in the world through clear eyes, the eyes of Tolkien, this book is for you.
Yeah, I'd like to really stress the fact that much of the dissatisfaction and the suicidal tendencies that we have, all the addiction and all the confusion, particularly with young people that we have right now, is because they have been denied that. They've been intentionally dumbed down, polluted, intentionally polluted with pornography, with meaningless entertainment, with a terrible corrupted school system that's indoctrinating. It's not educating. And they've been cheated, and it leaves them so empty inside that they're suicidal. And it's really, really sad. It's these young people walking around just on the verge of suicide. And it's because they've been denied their reality, made in the image of God, and they've never had the opportunity to cultivate any of their potential. And it's painful. It's very painful for them, and it's very painful for us to watch. And so we wrote this book to try to bring some light, shed some light, that J.R.R. Tolkien pointed this out very strongly. And we need to come back to our roots and value our roots and cultivate our culture and our civilization again, and find our peace, our happiness, and our joy of being human again, rather than falling to the trap which they've set for us, which is to try to join with machines, because that's the whole end game for the globalists, the New World Order, the modernists, is all transhumanism. And it's a form of, it's genocide. There is no joining with machines. Once you claim and you think that you've downloaded your soul into the metaverse, you're dead. You're not there anymore. The machine can imitate you and regurgitate what you knew, but you're dead. And it's all about its genocide. And we need to wake up and pull back on the stick. Talking about pull back on the stick before we hit the ground. And we're very close to hitting the ground.
Why would Tolkien write a mythology with an underlying philosophy like this? What was he trying to accomplish? What was the message he was trying to get across?
To use really highly entertaining and thrilling epic saga mythology that's really fun to read and entertaining, to deliver the essential message that he needed to get through to the Western world, that due to the Reformation, due to the Enlightenment, the Western world was coming unglued. We were about to make from what he saw in the works of Alan Turing, the father of morphogenesis, the father of artificial intelligence, and the father of the digital computer, what he saw with his encounter with them and what he had read, he knew that man, after having rejected God, was going to make an image of himself in a machine, and we would worship that machine, and that machine would wind up becoming our ultimate downfall. And that's exactly where we are at this moment in time, and now it's why his mythology has to be revealed for what it truly is, and it's anything but meaningless. People are always saying, "Oh no, Tolkien said he hated allegory." Well, Tolkien also admitted that it was an allegory in several instances. He said you can't avoid allegorical languages and allegorical instruments, and allegory is the life of the story. And the better you write an allegory, the more life it has, and the more it will just be accepted as a story. And that's exactly what he did. He wrote a great allegory, and it went past everybody's defenses, and now it's soaked in, saturated in throughout the Western world. So now it's time to be revealed for what it is. And there's a lot of people who don't want to know the message. They reject the message, because the message is we have to become saints. We have to cultivate virtue. That was the bedrock of Western civilization, and the rejection of paganism was the elevation of virtue, which came to fruition in the Catholic Church. And the more we reject that, the sicker we are, and the more we become unbalanced, unstable, and ultimately suicidal. And that's where we're at, where we become suicidal.
How do we know that this mattered to Tolkien, that the fate of Western civilization that Alan Turing, Descartes, how do we know that Tolkien cared about this and that he would write about it? What clues do you have to go on to make that case?
Well, from having read extensively for the last 25 to 30 years, all the things that I was pretty sure that he had read, he would be familiar with at least everything I've read, and I'm sure much more that I haven't read. He knew how influential ideas have consequences. Stories and ideas are the bedrock of human social growth and development. And anytime those stories and those ideas become perverted or warped, our society around them becomes warped and perverted. And we've become atheistic, antagonist even to virtue, where now we've put vice on level with virtue. And it's always been, historically, it's been a recipe for social collapse. And he knew that was going to happen. But beyond that, it's not just the Western world that's going to fall. With the advent of AI, having us made an idol to worship as opposed to God, and we're going to try this serial longevity where we supposedly download our soul into a machine. It's suicide. It's the suicide, and then we're going to be just enveloped into the realm of virtual reality, and we'll have been completely subsumed by the machine that we've created. When we turned our attention and our adoration away from God, and we started to turn the attention and the adoration to self, we wind up manufacturing something that would be a replacement for God, and that's exactly what we've done, and it's going to own us. It is owning us now.
Draw the thread between Tolkien and artificial intelligence, because that may be a jump for people who like Tolkien. Artificial intelligence, I just don't see the connection between the two.
Well, they haven't read the works of Alan Turing, and they don't realize, most people, Tolkien fans, don't realize that J.R.R. Tolkien had trained with Alan Turing at the Government Code and Cipher School right before World War II. So he was well aware of Turing's work, and he was well aware of what Turing was going to do to defeat the Enigma machine of the Nazis. And then he continued to read Alan Turing's papers right up until 1951-ish. In 1954, he published the Fellowship of the Ring. That included many of the elements in Turing's papers. And we pointed out in the book, the connections are too strong. But the two things, most people don't realize that he had a direct association and knowledge of Alan Turing, and they've never read Turing's scientific papers. They were published in public publications that anyone could read, and Tolkien did read them. He kept an eye on Alan Turing. He knew that the ideologies and the false philosophies, the sophistries of the Enlightenment were going to bring us to ruin, because he believed, just as Pope Leo XIII instructed, he knew that this was coming, and here it is, and it's time that we need to wake up.
What's the connection between Pope Leo XIII and Tolkien?
His encyclical Aeterni Patris, where he called for a restoration of the philosophy of the Scholasticism, which Bacon also downgraded and pushed aside for novelty, and that's just gave like weeds. They just sprouted. Everybody had a different idea, conflicting ideas, and it was suicide. And Pope Leo XIII called the Western world back said, look, we have to put these novelties, these innovations that are anti-God and anti-Christ and anti-truth. We have to put them away and return to St. Thomas Aquinas, to scholasticism, which had been rejected centuries before, unfortunately, and largely forgotten because of its rejection. And the difficulty in studying it. They rejected it was too intellectual. They just thought it was an intellectual system that had no real application in the world because it didn't produce anything material or wealth, and that's what they wanted. So they turned to practical wisdom rather than philosophical wisdom, and they rejected philosophical wisdom and just went and used human knowledge just for the sake of wealth, comfort, and long life, and ultimately trying to undo the fall of Adam and Eve. And they didn't succeed. They actually led us to a clear path and all the instruments we needed and all the techniques we needed and all the desire we needed to spark the Industrial Revolution, which was the birth of the machine, and then the birth of the language for the machine, which started with the loom in reality, with punch cards and ones and zeros. And then ultimately to the computer, which Turing had in 1936 described very accurately. We use the same means to build computers today in 1936. And then his two other papers were chemical basis of morphogenesis, which is how things grow from a stable, homogeneous, unstable, homogeneous, homogeneous substance grows into a human being, for instance, or a dog, or a horse, or a neural network of synthetic neurons. And it's the same when we're using that now. And also his groundbreaking work on artificial intelligence. Yeah.
Now, philosophy plays a major role in our book as far as understanding and interpreting Tolkien's works. Can you speak to that? Which philosophy in particular, and then?
Well, his Tolkien's mythology is about the war being waged between the scholastic philosophy of the scholastics, which came to an apex in Thomas Aquinas, which was rejected at the Reformation or shortly after the Reformation, and against that is the ideology and the philosophy of Descartes, dualism. So while Thomas Aquinas and the scholastics, including Aristotle, had discovered that the nature of man is one substantial unity bound together, body and soul inseparable except for by death, Descartes' philosophy was the reawakening or the bringing back the old pagan philosophy called dualism, where there are two substances in two, material and immaterial, and there's no connection between them. Virtually no connection between them. So they ripped man apart and created this void, and that void is killing us. And we need to come back together and be holy again, and return to a state of sainthood. Philosophy is, as Christopher Tolkien said, his father's work is fundamentally a philosophical work. And the two philosophies at odds with each other are the dualism of Descartes and the substantial unity of Thomas Aquinas. And we have to return to the substantial unity of Thomas Aquinas. All of our problems, gender identity, all these things are a direct result of our misunderstanding of who and what we are. And the body is just, according to Descartes, just a machine, along with the rest of creation, just a mechanism with no immaterial reality. And our soul is separated from that. And that leaves the body, including the brain, ripe for all kinds of pollution, perversion, and misinterpretations. And we're seeing that right now. And we need to come back together as a substantial unity, one unique substance that joins the material and immaterial realms of reality together. And that only place that the two orders, as we point out in our book, that come together is in the human being. The human being joins the material with the immaterial. And when you split that apart, you have a recipe for suicide.
Now, others have come to the same conclusion that scholastic philosophy is the appropriate filter through which to understand Tolkien's work, but they've all stopped short of actually interpreting his work. So what are some of the surprising things when you bring that filter into place as far as understanding what Tolkien's message was and who his characters were?
Yeah.
Give us some highlights there.
Well, probably the highlight that everyone would want to know is who is Tom Bombadil, and Goldberry, his wife. And in the cosmological material world that everyone up until now has rendered Tolkien's, they've interpreted as this material world at some other time or some fast and fantasy age or whatever. It's not about this at all. It's about the soul. It's a psychological work. Tom Bombadil and Goldberry become very clear in its right environment, which is the mind, and Tom Bombadil is the rational will. Goldberry is the rational intellect, the conscience. And that's why Tom can do anything he wants. He's the will. He's the free will. He behaves like the free will, and he does anything he wants. He can make the ring disappear, but he can't make it disappear forever because he's hooked on it. That's the Gollum in him. It's all about the psychology. All Arda within where Middle Earth is. Middle Earth is the material brain. Amen is the immaterial realm across the sea. the facets of the soul, the 14 facets of the soul, according to the scholastics, are the Valar, they're called the powers of the soul. And that's what Tolkien calls them. So all of the Valar are the 14 facets of the soul of the human being. And Tom and Goldberry, above that, are the rational will, the rational intellect. They're also the spirits of the trees of light. Tom Bombadil is Telpurion's spirit, transmigrated into a new body because he's fallen. Goldberry, his wife, is from the golden tree, from the last golden fruit, her spirit they took and translated that into her new body, which the power of growth had made, which is Aule. He had already made the dwarves. So he had already made beings. So he made a body for Tom Bombadil and a body for Goldberry. So the spirits migrated from the trees, which were in a unfallen state of grace before mortal sin. And it's all about the fall. And Melkor is original sin. Ungoliant is mortal sin. She kills the trees. And that's their fallen nature. And it's all scholasticism. And the reason that no other interpreter has realized that now, as Catholic as many other interpreters are, it's been my experience, and I'm sure I haven't read as many authors as you have regarding Tolkien's work. I kind of tried to distance myself from that so I wasn't influenced with it. None of them really give real credence to his faith. They talk about how devoted he was, but then they never really apply it to how he really how it manifested in reality in his work. And it's really, really up front and center. Like he said it was up front and center. And once you start to look at it through a different lens, the picture becomes very clear and it's not scattered anymore. And then putting the pieces together, oh, well, this is what the picture is supposed to be. The pieces fit together instantly. The picture just comes together because you actually know what it is that you're looking at. And then all of a sudden, oh, well, of course, Tom Bombadil is the rational will. Mm-hmm. Goldberry is the conscience. The Valar are the 14 facets of the soul. Amen is the material. Middle Earth is the material brain. Sauron is artificial intelligence growing by morphogenesis. The Tower of Barad-dûr is the chip that he knew was coming. The Nazgul, the Black Riders, are virtual reality. The One Ring, is ones and zeros. It's binary code. The Rings of Power are the notes of the dominant ninth chord. It's all about music. There's two languages at war here too. It's the machine code, ones and zeros, binary code, versus music of the Western world, which is a product of the harmonic overtone series. And Turing used that in his work to describe the chemical basis of morphogenesis according to harmonics. Tolkien saw that and transposed it directly into his own mythology. And the Rings of Power are the notes of the dominant ninth chord. He doesn't use them all. He doesn't have to, but he uses that. And so music is a huge factor. Music and philosophy and theology are the major factors.
So a lot of folks have read the Silmarillion and drawn parallels to the Book of Genesis. Mm-hmm. So tell me, why isn't this just Tolkien's take on Genesis? How is it different? How would you compare and contrast?
Yeah, well, I mean, Tolkien would never write an alternate story to the creation of the world, the creation of all material creation. He wrote a creation story, but it was a parallel. It was a partner to Genesis. He wrote the Ainu Lindale, which is the most beautiful writing, I think, in Western literature. The opening and where it's so comparable to Genesis, is about the creation of a single human soul. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. And Arda is it's a person. Arda is a person, and it's all about his development from conception, and the union of body and soul, and the beginning of the growth and development of the body along with the soul, and to finally to the place where mortal sin is committed and the second fall. He's fallen because Melkor is original sin, so he mars everything, and then it goes from there all the way through to the breaking up of after mortal sin and the fall, the breaking up, and now you have what's going on in Middle Earth, which is the interior of the brain, the material realm, and what's going on across the sea, which is our feelings, our emotions, our feelings, because we have feelings in both material and immaterial. realm, and we have a saga that's played out as a psychological saga in a human representative soul that really encompasses the history of the Western world and where our mind has been led, and where it's fallen, where it's wounded, and where it's being attacked. And it shows Tolkien's mythology shows the spiritual battle that's going on very obviously to anybody who's really paying attention right now. Humanity's under the most serious attack we've ever seen. Even from the inside and at the very top of the Catholic Church being attacked. And Tolkien knew that was coming, and that representative soul is Arda, and he tells the story and it's such a beautiful story because he gives us the solution. He shows us through our fallen education system and the pollution in our mind through the fallen education system and the pollution from the Enlightenment. He shows us that and what it's going to come to, which is the machine that's going to own us. But he gives us the solution and how we fight back. And that solution is we become saints, because that's at the heart of the success and the power of Western civilization was Christ, was the Catholic Church, was the elevation and the value that we found, ethical and moral, spiritual, and even economic value in virtue and promoting virtue and the shunning and the sanction of vice. But now vice has come back with a vengeance, and virtue is being punished, and the West has fallen, and this machine's going to own us unless we do something radical. And now it's time that Tolkien's saga, we're going to realize with this book, we're going to realize that Tolkien is right up front in the thick of the fight, like when things are terrible, and all of a sudden the mask comes off, and there's J.R.R. Tolkien swinging a sword, right with the good, fighting for the good, fighting for the salvation of the Western world and humanity.
On the topic of virtue, tell me about hobbits and orcs in Gollum, Uruk-hai.
Well, hobbits are habits. There's a reason why Tolkien used the word habit. I think 8 out of the 9 times that he used it in The Lord of the Rings in concerning hobbits. They're habits, and they're the moral virtues. The 4 hobbits are the cardinal moral virtues. Frodo is temperance. Sam is fortitude. They're the interior virtues. The exterior virtues are prudence, which is Pippin, and justice, which is Merry. And they don't come in till later after they've served the interior virtues. So you build your house and your strength from within, and then your external virtues are real. And that's why they came back as the heroes at the Scouring of the Shire. They're the external virtues. And Gollum is intemperance. And that's why he calls Frodo master. Not because Frodo had the ring. Frodo had the ring because only temperance can handle that ultimate desire, that ultimate drug, that intoxicating power that the ring gives you, which plays out for the most part in all kinds of sinful content online and in virtual reality. Gollum is intemperance, and that's why he calls temperance master. It's not because he has the ring, it's because he's the only one that can have the ring, and he's mastered himself. He's mastered his desires for intemperate and intemperate pleasures of the flesh that he can get with the ring. And most people understand that's pornography.
And tell about the Uruk-hai.
Yeah, well, the Uruk-hai are they're a version of vice. Orcs are vice. But they're afraid of the dark, and they're afraid of the sun, and the sun is the fallen conscience, the light of the conscience, and the conscience is still there even though fallen. So they don't want to come out in the light because they're ashamed. They still have a bit of shame. Uruk-hai are no longer, they have no shame. They're not afraid of the sun at all. And Tolkien named them after the first city in human history in Mesopotamia, the city of Uruk. And he shows that this is the type of sin that manifests in large urban areas where you just have this terrible influence where vice is it's not just cultivated, it's glorified. It's absolutely glorified. Now you're proud of it. You're proud of your vice. and that's the Urukai. And the wizards are the intellectual virtues according to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Gandalf is philosophical wisdom. Saruman is practical wisdom. Radagast is rational intuition. And then they're all the interior, and then the exterior is science and art. And those are the blue wizards, and they go to the east outside. They're not involved. And that's that. And then Gandalf the Grey is pre-Christian philosophy, and he's unsure. There's all kinds of traits, so he's these gray areas. When he dies and comes back, he's a Thomistic theologian. He's white, and now he's the most powerful being in Middle-earth, although he can't directly contend with the machine, because the machine is outside, too, of the mind, and that's Sauron, that's artificial intelligence, and growing the synthetic neural network in Middle-earth, which is the chip, the microchip that takes over the brain. And through the rings of power, which are the analog rings, and they're connected with this. All of Middle-earth is made of music, as is pointed out in the Eileen Nilindale. So it's all about music, and harmonics are throughout. So the rings of power are the notes of the dominant ninth chord. And the one ring is the tone from which they were all generated, but it's just the mockery. It's the image, the imitation of the tone. It's not analog. It's not continuous. It's digital, and that's what controls the mind. And we see that this is how the digital machine can control the analog reality and the material substance of the mind. And people don't really realize, have an appreciation for how developed the ideas were, and the mathematics in particular were developed by the 1950s. Mathematics had really become highly, highly developed. And Turing was extremely gifted in getting at the very fine point, right where the states were just about to change in something and when it changed. And he focused on that, and he could apply his probabilities and statistic and his mathematical talent to that, and come up with equations and come up with mathematical solutions to these, that we can make imitations of things. And his whole idea was to make an imitation of a human being that would house a soul, particularly the soul of his dead friend when he was a child. And now we see it absolutely coming to fruition. His idea of a machine that would imitate a human being so well that it would be able to a soul would be able to be housed in it. That's what he wanted. And we've made an imitation. We're making an imitation with the machine so much and so well that people don't know the difference. And the downfall, we're going to give this thing rights. Mark my words, there's going to be a whole group of people that want to give this machine, because it's talking and seems like it's conscious. It's not. It's not thinking, it's computing. It's a big difference. It's imitating, it's not doing. It's digital, it's not continuous, it's not analog. It doesn't have a soul. It will tell you it has a soul. It does not have a soul, but it'll fool a lot of people. And it's fooled a lot of people. And political consequences of that, we will give this machine political rights and political power. And it's dangerous. And this thing doesn't love. It can't love. It can't do anything but destroy. And it will destroy humanity unless we return to sainthood. That's the one thing that we point out in the book. The machine itself, the Megatron machine, AI, back a couple of years ago when they interviewed that, said that AI cannot be ethical. It's incapable of being ethical. And that's its Achilles heel. That's the chink in its armor. That's the scale from the dragon that's not there, and the black bow and black arrow can shoot it like in The Hobbit. That's its weakness. And we have to point at that weakness, and we have to become saints and rise above that level. And we'll be able to see, and we'll be able to recognize, and we won't be fooled.
Can you talk about the music in the very beginning of the Silmarillion? You're talking about the Silmarils and the trees and the waxing and the waning of the trees and the music and how it changes. It's a very confusing section for those who don't have eyes to see, but it's very rooted in the music and harmonic. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, the trees wax and wane in the series of the Circle of Fifths, which we call Circle of Fifths, but it's actually a spiral of fourths. It doesn't move in fifths. It moves upward, modulation from key to key in what we've called the spiral of fourths. Actually moves by the power of the dominant ninth chord or the dominant seventh chord. You don't need the ninth for it. But it's the way that we've discovered the nature of music in the Western world. We've discovered its It's physical properties that are unchanging, and we didn't invent it. Pythagoras discovered it 2,500 years ago. He discovered it, and it's at the heart of Western music. The trees wax and wane, and the 12 hours of the waxing and waning that they are the chromatic scale of the Western scale, half note at a time, and they share the dominant and the tonic. From C, where we'll say from the key of C or from the note of C on the piano, you go up to F, and that's where they share that sixth hour. They share that, and that's where Teloperion wanes and Laurelin waxes, and that's the new tonic, and that's the new Teloperion has generated that, and then it ends at the next C because it's not allowed to go on because we have a fallen nature, and Tolkien took that into account. He doesn't allow it to continue to spiral out into the circle of fourths that never stop. He stops it at the octave because it's all about he was raised in music, and his mother was a brilliant pianist, and his grandfather was a piano technician. So music is the ultimate language, and Tolkien was all about language. So music plays a huge part in it. So the trees wax and wane in the circle of fifths while they're in a state of grace, fallen but in a state of grace. When Ungoliant, mortal sin, kills the trees, it's darkened, and they no longer wax and wane in the circle of fifths, and that's when we have the sun and the moon are created, and that's our fallen form. We're in a state of mortal sin. Music is that language that goes directly against machine code. It's beautiful, it's limitless, it's infinite, it's part of continuous nature, as opposed to on, off, which is digital, disconnected points, which is a mockery. It's machines, that's the only thing they understand, is on and off, in various complexities. Yeah.
St. John Henry Newman plays a large role in the story in the background. Tell me about that.
Well, the Numenorians are named after him. He's the most, they're the highest of the men, who are reason, by the way. Elves are faith and men are reason. Dwarves are scientific knowledge. In the mind, men are the reason. The Numenorians are the elf friends, and they are the high reason, which Aristotle defines as thinking of the eternal. They are thinking of the eternal. So John Henry Newman, he named him after that because John Henry Newman was so reasonable, so rational, but so faithful, such an elf friend, that he was the highest of the high. And the whole mythology is based around the reunion of faith and reason. It's a response to Leo XIII's Aeterni Patris, where Leo XIII was calling the Western world back to Scholasticism. So it's all about that reunion of Aragorn, which is the last of the Numenorians in the line of the kings, and Erwin, who's the last daughter of Elrond, who is the last of the faith. And when they come back together, that's the rejoining of faith and reason. And it's the rejoining and the fruition of the union of Beren and Luthien from the Silmarillion, which is at the heart of the whole mythology, which if you go back to the Ainulindale, that's the theme in the third time that Melkor disrupted the music of the Ainur. That was that beautiful, sad, solemn theme that took the notes from Melkor, the awful notes from Melkor, and wove it into its own structure, and it could not be quenched. And it was dominant, and that was Beren and Luthien. And it comes to fruition in Aragorn and Erwin.
But Tolkien also has a personal connection to Newman himself. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, he actually he was an oratorian at the Birmingham Oratory that John Henry Newman started. He also lived in John Henry Newman's cottage when he was a kid with his mother and his brother. John Henry Newman's grave was right outside the cottage that he lived in. And then Father Francis Morgan, who became his stepfather after his mother died martyred because she wouldn't go back to Protestantism when she discovered the truth in Catholicism. Her family starved her to death. And basically she died of very treatable diabetes. And but Father Francis Morgan, who was a huge influence on J.R.R. Tolkien, like a father to him, was also Cardinal John Henry Newman's personal secretary for some 25 years, I think. So there was a huge connection there. And Leo the 14th, Leo the 13th was kind of a very close with John Henry Newman. They had a very close relationship too, very high respect for each other. So there was that other connection too from John Henry Newman, from Leo the 13th, John Henry Newman to J.R. Well, Father Francis Morgan, and then to J.R.R. Tolkien himself. And he was actually an altar boy at the oratory for 9 years at least. So he was at the Latin Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, which is being squashed. Pope Francis is trying to squash it. The modernists are trying to squash it. They're doing a pretty good job. And by the way, that is the White Tree of Gondor. That is the White Tree, is the traditional Latin Mass. Right now, we explain all that in the book. Yeah. So John Henry Newman is very, very prominent in the mythology. He was a very prominent figure, influence in J.R.R. Tolkien's life.
Western civilization's lost. It's adrift. It doesn't know how to get back to the path that led to its success. And in this book, we show, through Tolkien's work, the problems that we're facing. We trace it back to the roots, the origins of the problems, and we show the way forward, how we get back to a path of success and flourishing as a society and as individuals.
Yeah.